Now that we've been introduced to the topic of layers and also layer transparency, what I want to do here is start to take a look at how we can begin to work with layers. And I want to work with this photograph here. This is a picture of one of my good friends, Matt Kloskowski. He's actually written a great book on layers, so I thought it would be fitting to use this picture. Well, over here in the Layers panel, before we start to click around, what I want to do is change the way these layers are displayed. You can do that by right-clicking or control-clicking in the Layers panel. And here I'm going to choose a larger thumbnail size. I'll choose large thumbnails. You can see my layer thumbnails are now much bigger. Sometimes this is helpful in order to be able to actually see what's in the panel. You can always change this by simply right-clicking or control-clicking and then choosing a different option as well. Okay, well, I'll go back to that large thumbnail option because it's good for demos. You notice the background layer has its visibility turned on. Next, I'm going to turn on the visibility of this layer, clean up and a little bit of color adjustment. Here we can see that before and then after, basically removing his tag and then changing the color of the lens a little bit. Next, I have a color adjustment layer. This particular layer really warms things up, so it changes the color and tone kind of to something which looks a little bit like fire. Here we can see the before and now then the after. Well, if you click in a layer, you have some controls which allow you to control it. We talked a little bit about transparency, and in Photoshop, they refer to that by opacity. Well, if something is opaque, you can't see through it. Well, you can decrease its opacity and make it more transparent. For example, with this color adjustment layer, if we click and drag this slider to the left, well, now we're going to have less of a color effect, and you can see I'm slowly diminishing that. Here's 8%. And then bring it up to 100 by way of comparison. We can also duplicate layers. We can do so a couple of different ways. You can either click and drag this to the new layer icon, or you can press Command or Control J. By doing that, it will then duplicate the layer. Here you can see I've stacked up or increased this color effect by duplicating a layer. We can also turn off the visibility of these layers if we want to diminish this, or we could target one of these layers that we've turned on, and we could just lower the opacity so that we can then control how much color we're bringing into our picture. Well, next up top, we have two layers which have some text in them. Layers and then layers are cool. Well, let's say that I want to move these layers around. Well, we can click in this graphic layer here, and with our Move tool selected, we can go ahead and click and drag to reposition this. We can also do the same thing with this layer. We'll go ahead and again click and drag to change that location. Well, if ever you want to move two layers together, just hold down the Command or Control key and then click on both layers. With two or more layers selected, you can then move them by simply clicking and dragging. You can also change some characteristics about the layers. For example, we could decrease the opacity so that these would become more transparent. And we can do that 2 layers at a time, or you can just target one layer and modify its opacity by itself. And you can see how I can do this by simply clicking and changing that opacity amount.